start another month. It's the last Wednesday of whatever month it is, July. We'll be looking at August 2017 here at Soul Food Coffee House in Redmond, Washington. It's an interesting day for, I think we're overamping a little bit. Then again, the sun is conjuncting Mars today. And I don't know about you, but I've been overamping all day. That's better. We have two things to talk about today. And then we have a pretty intense month coming up for a number of reasons. And I think these days, for those of you who have been coming here regularly on the last Wednesday of the month, it's been just about a year now where nearly every month I've said, if you think last month was crazy, wait till next month. And I don't think we have to wait. I mean, I think that it's crazy hour by hour right now. And we'll dig into that in a little bit. But I wanted to start off with three things. One is just noting that for the last couple of weeks, last week or so, from the Earth's point of view, the Earth, the Sun, and Mars, from Earth's point of view, the Sun and Mars have been moving along at about the same speed. But Mars is on the far side of the Sun, which means that because Mars is farther away from the Sun than the Earth is, that if you drew a straight line from the Earth to the Sun and then kept going the distance of the Earth's distance from the Sun on the other side, and then went again that distance even more to get to Mars, that Mars is lined up with the Sun but on the far side of the Sun. When Mars is retrograde, it's closer to Earth like all retrogrades are, and therefore Mars would be on the same side of the Sun as the Earth, but the Earth would be in the middle. And so when you have Mars opposite, or any planet opposite the Sun, in opposition to the Sun, that planet is retrograde, because planets go retrograde when they get closer to Earth. So now we have Mars conjuncting the Sun, but it's on the far side of the Sun, because it can't come between the Earth and the Sun. And they've been moving about the same speed for about a week or two. And last month, from this very same position, I said that as the month of July progressed, it would become Marsier and Marsier. Mars is the god of war. In fact, when I posted the YouTube, I think I posted something that was a play on the old "Fly the Friendly Skies of United," and I said "Fly the Angry Skies," because the skies for the month of July built in anger, in redness, in Marsiness, in assertion, in aggression, in fieriness. And we've certainly seen that played out on the political spectrum. And interestingly enough, even though Mars and the Sun, from Earth's point of view, are moving at about the same speed, the Sun is moving a little bit faster than Mars, because it takes Mars 2 years to go around through the zodiac roughly. And the Sun, obviously, 1 year, because it's the Earth going around the Sun. But from the Earth's point of view, the Sun goes through each of the 12 signs in a month, so that takes a year. What that means is that for the last week or two, even for the last several weeks, that the Sun and Mars have both been moving about a degree a day, but each day the Sun got a little bit closer and a little bit closer and a little bit closer to being in the same degree as the Sun, even though they were each moving at about a degree a day. Today, Mars and the Sun, from Earth's point of view, are at the exact same degree. And we have this chart for, well, that's not today. Oh, there it is. It is. I looked over here and saw July 22nd, and that's fine. Okay, here we go. We do pay no attention to that date up there. It's actually the clock ticking over here, because we are looking at an astro clock where the moon right now is at 22 degrees. Let's get rid of that. The moon is at 22 degrees of Virgo, and Venus is at 24 degrees of Gemini. Saturn is at 21 degrees of Sagittarius. We'll have something to say about that in a moment. But I want you to look right here at the Sun and Mars at 4 degrees of Leo, 15 minutes, and the Sun at 4 degrees of Leo, 16 minutes. And I'm going to take this clock and turn it into an animation, and I'm going to back this up an hour at a time. And right there at 5:30 this evening, that's Pacific time, you can see the Sun was at 4 degrees 11 minutes, Mars was at 4 degrees 12 minutes, and an hour later, the Sun was past Mars. What that means, the astrological jargon, the word that we astrologers would use for this aspect, the aspect is the Sun conjunct Mars. But it's been conjuncting Mars for weeks, and it will be, if I move this a day at a time, just watch here the Sun and Mars only, because there they are a half a degree apart, there they are still only 1 degree apart. You can see that they're both moving about a degree a day, except the Sun's moving a little bit faster. So you can see that the Sun is escaping its conjunction to Mars. But even if we look here at August 4th, 5th, 6th, the Sun and Mars are still only 2-3 degrees apart. From an astrological point of view, they're still conjunct. However, today, on July 26th, this aspect of the Sun and Mars are not just conjunct, the aspect is perfect. And the word that we would use as an astrologer to describe an aspect that's become exact, that has 0 degrees orb, the orb being the difference of an aspect from being exact. It's 0 degrees, 0 minutes orb, it's exact. We would say this aspect has perfected. That's the language we would use. This aspect has perfected. So we have a perfected Sun-Mars conjunction. Mars is the god of war. It's assertion, it's direction, it's fiery, it's feisty. It has a purpose. It can be angry. It can actually... Mars not only is offensive, but it's defensive. Mars is the planet that basically establishes ego boundaries. So when the Sun, the central filament, the heating element of our little solar neighborhood here, when the Sun lines up with Mars, we are coming from our individual core and we're pissed off. We're angry. We're going to say something. We're going to hit someone back. We're going to do what we need to do to defend our territory. And I think it's very telling what's going on today, right now in Washington, D.C., with a fight back that because the people all around the country have stood up for what they want, the power structure has had to deal with this fight in a different direction than they might have thought. I don't know what's going to happen today or tomorrow or the next day, or if or what's going to be pushed through, snuck through. However, as many of you know, every month I say I'm going to try to be non-political, but I don't think we can separate the fact that Mars is conjuncting the Sun, and we're seeing a fight being played out on our political spectrum in the microcosm of what we might call health care or sick I don't care or whatever you want to call it. But the fact of the matter is that this is a Mars-Sun conjunction energy right now, and it's been tracking for weeks. It's building to a crescendo yesterday, today, tomorrow, and then it will slowly begin to separate. It'll slowly begin to ease off. Doesn't mean the fight will be over, but we won't see this level of intensity. And we're seeing the same thing from several different issues, not only in United States politics, but around the world. Okay, I said there were three things that I wanted to say before I got into the month ahead, August. You know, we're still here in the end of July. But this is very important for setting up what the message of August is going to be. Because this Mars-Sun conjunction is in the sign of Leo. And we are in the Leo time of year. And we will be until after the solar eclipse on August 21st. And we definitely have eclipse stuff to talk about, because that will be largely the issue of what's going on for us during this month. Will be the lunar eclipse on August 7th and the solar eclipse on August 21st in the sign of Leo. And so we have this Leo energy that's very important. Okay, so the Sun conjunct Leo today was the first thing. These are non-August issues, even though it's August astrology forecast. It's July 26th. The other thing I wanted to mention, and I actually even thought maybe we should sing happy birthday, it's Carl Jung's 147th birthday. My math may be wrong. I can't do math anymore without Excel. It's like, 3 plus 5. Hold on. Load up Excel, and you put them in the different cells, do a sum. There was a wonderful science fiction, any sci-fi buffs here, there's a wonderful science fiction short story many years ago, written, I think, maybe even in the 50s or early 60s, by Isaac Asimov, who wrote the Foundation trilogy and well over 200 science books, not just science fiction. And this short story was about a man, the name of the story was A Feeling of Power. And it was about a man whose life was doomed and fell apart and ended up being executed or in jail for the rest of his life because he was an actuary. And as all the actuaries that he worked with, they had these incredible calculating machines. And it took place sometime in the future. This was before the UNIVAC or any of the early computers. And so Asimov is telling a time when insurance actuarials are actually working with this computing machine, and this man who's fascinated with numbers basically works out at home after hours. He becomes obsessed with the realization that there's actually ways to manipulate these numbers manually without actually relying on these computing devices. And people told him he shouldn't mess and that it was not an okay thing for him to be wasting his time, but it eats up his whole life. It costs him his job, his marriage, his happiness, his life, and he ends up being jailed for it. Why am I telling you this story? I don't have a clue. A Feeling of Power. Someone help me. I did have a reason. Carl Jung's birthday. That had nothing to do with... Oh, I can't calculate without Excel. All right. So, just a very short thing. I know we don't normally do this, but we forget sometimes to honor our elders. And Jung is so important in our entire worldview, whether we have studied or read any Jung in particular doesn't matter, because we get it through so many facets of our lives now. There wouldn't be people like Joseph Campbell or James Hillman or Thomas More. We wouldn't be reading about soulmates and even the use of astrology in the way we do. I'm not saying this is incumbent upon that, but Jung was avidly interested in astrology. In fact, one of his daughters became an astrologer and delivered a paper at the local institute where Jung attended and totally endorsed her work. But I just want to acknowledge the fact that Jung is a sun in Leo, because obviously he was born today in 1875. But the interesting thing about his sun is that it's exactly 90 degrees, 3 degrees of Leo to 3 degrees of Taurus. It's exactly 90 degrees to the planet Neptune. Neptune is the planet of dreams, imagination. Neptune is the planet of that's associated with that which is beyond the limits of the reality of Saturn. And this sun square Neptune is so much of what drove Jung's life. And interestingly enough, not only was Neptune in Taurus, but so was the moon and so was Pluto. And what's fascinating here is that, as many of you know, Jung actually studied with Sigmund Freud for a couple of years, and then their relationship was always a difficult struggle because Freud was a Taurus. And Taurus, which is where Jung's moon was, is square 90 degrees to Jung's sun and Uranus. So this is a bit wide for an exact conjunction, but the fact that the sun and Uranus, the breakaway planet, the planet of different, of revolution, of shock, of surprise, was square. Not only his moon was very closely square Uranus, and his sun was square Neptune, and in some ways that defines his relationship, or at least part of his relationship with Freud. I don't want to belabor this, but I just wanted to say happy birthday, Carl. And that's not Carl's Jr. There are other things we could talk about in this chart, a lot of other things, like the trine between Jupiter and Saturn, the make it real, Saturn trining Jupiter, the philosophy, Jupiter in Libra. He's having a Jupiter return right now because Jupiter is in Libra now. And this kind of triangle between Pluto, Jupiter, and Saturn being a very important dynamic in his chart. I don't want to fall into his chart. We have other stuff to do, but I just wanted to honor it. Boom. Done. Now, back to where we should be, which is here and now. We don't need that. Where'd it go? All right, we may have to recreate this. Aries rising, animated clock, animation, and here we are. We're now looking at, let's do this. There we go. Okay, so there was a third thing that I actually wanted to bring up, but I think I'll save it until later. Let's jump into August, because that's what we're here for. We are seeing major events unfolding on the political arena that are reflections of our individual lives. The two are one and the same. We cannot separate what happens on the political, global, economic, cultural scale from what happens in our individual personal lives of relationships, work, home, family, etc. The fact that the sun is lined up with Mars is something that we are all experiencing on one level or another. Often, and I've said this before from here, that when something happens out there, we react to it very differently. I'll give you an example. The sun lining up with Mars is about expression of anger. It's about being fiery, feisty. It's arguing. It's taking care of business. It's doing things. It's hammering and nailing and getting in your car and going somewhere. And these may be things that we do all the time. But this last week or so, and building to today, and then even for the next week or so, this Sun conjunct Mars is very fiery and feisty. However, we don't all express all the energy that we experience. In fact, often we experience energy and it makes us feel a little uncomfortable, and we do one of two things with it to get rid of that comfort. We can either consciously say, I don't like this, I'm not going to engage it. And as soon as you consciously deny or disengage from an energy, this is what a psychologist would call suppression. We can suppress an energy by consciously deciding, I'm not going to play that game. My coffee. Thank you. Thank you, Makia and Kevin and Soul Food and Mom and Dad and all of you. I had a James Cagney moment. All right. So one of the things that we can do when we get face to face with an energy we don't like, we can suppress it. We can bury it. We can say, I ain't going there. The second thing that happens is not something that, well, it is something we do, but it's not something we know we do. And this is, and the distinction between these two techniques is very important, and most of us give it no thought ever at all. And it's the difference between suppression and repression. If you know you're doing it, you're suppressing it. However, just as often, something happens and we don't engage it, but we don't know that we're not engaging it. This is the magic of the unconscious. You can't say, I realize that I'm doing this unconsciously and I continue to do it unconsciously, because you're doing it consciously if you can talk about it. The level of awareness determines whether something is suppression or repression. And it might be, for example, that there are politicians who are right now doing what they're doing without acknowledging that they're angry. That it's not like they're saying, I'm angry and I'm going to control it and do this with it. They're totally in denial. And I'm not putting all this on the politicians or on politicians on either side of the aisle in the United States. We all do it. And that is when the sun is conjuncting Mars, we may react by being incredibly tired and not doing anything. Because there's that thing of energy coming up so strong and so much that it shuts down. And we'll talk more about this in a few minutes when we get to one of the most important things about the month of August is one, the two eclipses. The first important thing is the two eclipses. Doesn't work. Anyhow, the two eclipses are important. The other important thing about August is Mercury, which goes around the sun 4 times a year. From Earth's point of view, 3 times a year, Mercury will catch back up to Earth. And when it catches up to Earth and comes between the Earth and the sun, it looks like it's going backwards because the Earth is going forward faster. And I've talked about this many times from here. It's the phenomenon of being on a subway or in a train and having another subway car on the track right next to you, so the windows are almost touching. And you're going faster than the other train, and you look out the window, and it looks like it's going the other way. But it ain't. It's going your way, just not as fast. That's what retrograde is. The planet looks like it's going backwards, just like if you're stopped at a red light and you got a car right next to you and you take your foot off the gas and you're just drifting forward a touch and you think the car next to you is in reverse. Same thing. So whenever a planet gets close to Earth, that's when it turns retrograde. And we have Mercury turning retrograde on August 12, and it stays retrograde all the way through September 5 when it turns direct again. And we'll talk a little bit more about this and what it means and the fact that it's retrograde through the eclipse, through the solar eclipse, the total eclipse, and what it activates, because this is all an important piece of August. Okay, so let's come back to here and now. Actually, let's come back to, we're going to say here and now, but we're actually going to have this be the first of August. 8, 1, 17 with a little luck. There it is. Let's make it at noon. And there we go. So here we have a chart for August 1st, 2017. And there are a couple of things that are important. First, that are important for August. First of all, aside from Jupiter, we really have no outer planet connections that are perfected or exact. But Jupiter makes two exact connections, both parts of larger scenarios. And the first happens on August 4th, and that is that Jupiter squares Pluto, and you can see there the thick line, the thick red line. And as many of you know, these lines in the middle are the aspects or the geometrical patterns that are created by the planets. And the thicker the line, the closer it is to being perfected. And so here you can see how thick this line is, because Jupiter at 17 degrees on August 1st, 6 minutes, and Pluto at 17 degrees 35 minutes, they are less than a half a degree from being exactly square. And if we move that forward to August 4, you can see now the numbers are 17 degrees 31 minutes, 17 degrees 31 minutes, that Jupiter-Pluto square has been perfected. This is something we've been working with for a while. I talked about it a lot more last month. I'm not going to dig into it much now, other than to note that Pluto is the planet of transformation. Pluto is the planet of unconsciousness. It's the shadows. It's that which we do not know, cannot know. It's the hell realms. And whenever I refer to Pluto as relating to hell, I always need to do what I call my brief Christian disclaimer. Now, I'm not disclaiming Christianity. I'm only disclaiming Christianity's right to define hell. Hell has been around way longer than Christianity. And I like to quote William Blake, the English mystic poet, who said, "Hell was a place so beautiful it would torment an angel to insanity." What the hell does he mean? You see, magic happens in the dark, in the unconscious, in the hell realms, beneath the ground, in the shadows, in the night. That's where the cool shit happens. We can't see it, we can't know it. In fact, all the things in our life that are repressed, and there's a lot of them that we don't think about, is just repressed stuff. Anything that's repressed, and the things that we normally, that are repressed in our lives, they are things that actually create somatic physical symptoms. Although many people think of Jung as Freud's hot wunderkind student who was then kicked out of the Psychoanalytic Institute, it wasn't Jung that was Freud's big disappointment. It was Wilhelm Reich. Wilhelm Reich was actually Freud's hand-picked successor to inherit the Psychoanalytic Institute until they broke over very, very, very core issues. And I don't want to dig into this. It's a fascinating story, and Reich is an amazingly important person for understanding how the relationship between conscious and unconscious works. But the fact is that one of Reich's earlier books was a book called Character Analysis, in which he talked about how we physically armor ourselves based upon psychological issues, and these have to do with whether someone walks head forward, or whether we hold tension in our legs or the back of our legs, or in our chest or in our neck. All these different postures that we take. The unconscious isn't in the brain. The unconscious is distributed all through the body. So, that which is unconscious has incredible import. It actually controls way more of our lives than we realize. And the thing is that when something is unconscious, it's in the Pluto world. It's in the underworld. Pluto is the lord of the underworld. So, Pluto, the underworld, the subconscious, that which we are not aware of, has more power than that which we are aware of. So, when you got bad shit going on and you go to a therapist, you know what you're doing? You're going into the underworld and you're going on what Joseph Campbell would call the hero's journey. You're finding the treasure. You're bringing it back up here so it doesn't have the same power. It's still shit you got to deal with. But it doesn't have the same power over you when you know about it, when you're aware of it, when you're conscious. Are you with me here? Yeah. So, this is Jupiter squaring Pluto. Jupiter is the bigger, better, more magnifier, make it better, make it more. It's uplifting, it's bountiful, it's joy. The word Jupiter is Jove, jovial, joy, joyous, bountiful. These are all happy words. And Jupiter, it was benevolent. He was a philanderer. He meant well, though. But, he was just like, he's like a Sagittarian. Jupiter is Sagittarius' planet. So, Jupiter squaring Pluto is bringing up all this stuff from the underworld where we can see it and maybe not like it, but work with it. And this is exact on August 4th, kind of in a culmination of an aspect that has been going on for a while. And again, you can listen to last month's talk if you want more about the Jupiter-Pluto. This is more than I intended to say, but it's an important piece of what's happening, not only in our personal individual lives, but certainly on a global perspective. The other piece, the other slow-moving, you see, the philosophy is that when you have aspects, the slower moving the planets, the longer lasting the aspect, the more powerful, the deeper, the more resonant, the more it stirs up. And we've talked about for years now the Uranus square Pluto, which I'm not talking about specifically tonight. It's like a little vacation from it, but it's certainly still there. But Uranus and Pluto, Uranus is an 84-year cycle, Pluto is a 243-year cycle. These are very slow-moving planets. The slower moving the planet, the heavier the weight. And we've been through this incredible Uranus-Pluto square all through the 2010s. that came to a culmination in 2012 through 2015. We're still in it, but we're slowly moving away from it. When I look at a month ahead, the first thing I do is I look at what are the slowest moving planets that are making aspects, because they're the ones that hold the most power. So we have Jupiter is the slowest moving planet Jupiter is the slowest moving planet that's making aspects this month, which is not as slow moving when Saturn makes an aspect to Uranus, Neptune, or Pluto, or when Uranus makes an aspect to Neptune or Pluto, or when Neptune makes an aspect to Pluto. Neptune and Pluto only line up once every 500 years. They lined up exactly in the 1890s when Neptune, the planet of dreams and illusion, lined up with Pluto, the planet that brings things up from the underworld. And that's when Freud wrote The Interpretation of Dreams, the book that changed everything. All right, so coming back to now, we have Jupiter squaring Pluto the beginning of the month. And when we move to the end of the month, we have Jupiter. I'm going to just run this ahead real quickly to the end of the month. We have Jupiter coming into a sextile with Saturn. Now, this is a significant time. This is around the eclipse. We'll come back to this again in a minute. But you can see here Jupiter moving toward 21 degrees, making a harmonious sextile with Saturn. At the same time, Mars is in the picture, making a Mars moving fast. See, Saturn takes 30 years, 29 years to go around once. Jupiter takes 12 years to go around once. I already said Pluto takes 243 years. Mars, meanwhile, goes around the sun once every couple years, a little less than that. So by the end of the month, we have Jupiter, Saturn, and Mars forming these 3 points that are sextile, sextile, trine. And in fact, they're pulling in the energy of Uranus at the very end of Aries. Uranus moved into Aries back in 2010, and now 2017, 2018 is going to move out of Aries into Taurus. And so the ending of August is incredibly powerful because it's setting a tone for what's coming that's not based on stress. It's not based on squares and oppositions. It's based upon supportive sextiles and a trine. And even though the Mars is faster moving, it's actually so close to the eclipse, which is the day before, that this becomes a very key point in August. Just a quick word, though, about Jupiter sextile to Saturn. Jupiter and Saturn are a very important cycle. It is the cycle of social expansion and contraction. In fact, Jupiter, so Saturn takes about 30 years to go around once, okay? Jupiter takes about 12 years to go, a little bit less than 12 years to go around once. What that means is that from Earth's point of view, Jupiter catches up to Saturn every 20 years. From Earth's point of view, Jupiter and Saturn are opposite each other halfway through that 20-year cycle. So that, and this is crazy because when people say, do you really believe in astrology? Although I have to say not as many people say it now as said it 20 or 30 years ago. I often say, well, yeah, do you believe in the calendar? And they go, well, what do the two have to do with each other? Well, the calendar is astrological. I mean, a month is a lunar cycle. You know, in astrology, we take a cycle and divide it in half and then in half again to make oppositions and squares. That's what a week is. A fortnight is half of a month, and a week is half of a fortnight. Our calendar is astrological. In fact, the concept of a decade is an astrological phenomenon. Why? Because Jupiter, the planet of expansion, joins up with Saturn, the planet of contraction, every 20 years. When did they do that? Oh, 1900, 1920, 1940, 1960, 1980, 2000. Actually, it was early 2001, but close enough. And then back to 2020 coming up next, 2040, and so on. When did they oppose each other? In 1910, 1930, 1950, 1970, 1990, 2010, etc. What that means is that the difference in feeling that each decade has is astrological. And in fact, they often follow an expansion-contraction. Jupiter expansion, Saturn contraction. So that you have the 50s contracted, the 60s expansive, the 70s contracted, the 80s expansive, and so on. There's this energy between Jupiter and Saturn. That's the conjunction opposition cycle. This year, and perfecting at the end of August, Jupiter, the planet of expansion, forms a supportive sextile to Saturn, the planet of contraction. And this is an interesting balance. In some ways, Jupiter is the bigger, better, more elephant, blue planet, blue states, liberal Democrat. In some ways, Saturn, the contractive energy, is the conservative Saturnian holding in constrictive energy. They both have a purpose. Without either one of them, the other, without Jupiter expanding, Saturn will collapse on itself. Without Saturn holding Jupiter in, Jupiter becomes Neptune and just disperses without any form. So this dance between expansion and contraction is necessary, and it, in some ways, is the theoretical basis of our two-party system. A party of expansion and a party of contraction, if you will. I know it's way more complicated than that, but this is an astrology talk, not a political science talk. All right. However, when Jupiter and Saturn are in easy or smooth aspects to one another, like a sextile or a trine, then these two energies are working together. Now, it doesn't necessarily feel like that much right now, but I'm guessing that as we get closer to the end of August, as this aspect perfects, and as Mars, the god of war, is in that mix, that we may see some settling and some energy coming out of this that may actually give form to what the craziness has been. All right. That's the slow-moving aspects for August are the Jupiter square Pluto and the Jupiter sextile Saturn. Let's come back to the beginning of the month and let's see what we're doing. Okay, we got to move, but we're good. So, there's a number of little things that can be big. But there are a couple of big things that we need to make sure we cover that will really set the tenor for the month of August. And as I said earlier, the first thing are the two eclipses, and the second thing is Mercury retrograde. There's other aspects that happen in and around those things, but it's those two things that become the most important pieces of August. Aside from the lower frequency backdrop of stuff coming up from the unconscious, from the Jupiter square Pluto, and the cooperation between the expansive and contractive Jupiter and Saturn energies toward the end of the month. So let's come back to the beginning of the month here. And we have the Sun and Mars in Leo, and yet the Sun is moving further and further day by day away from Mars. But I want to start off with the full moon on August 7th, because that full moon is actually a lunar eclipse. That's close enough right there. The actual time of the lunar eclipse is 11:10, 10 minutes after 11 a.m., and that's Pacific time. Lunar eclipses are typically visible anywhere on the planet if it's dark, because you have to have the moon above the horizon. So at 11:10 a.m. here in Seattle, this lunar eclipse will not be observable. But it will be observable in any place on the planet where it is nighttime. This lunar eclipse is a full moon in Aquarius, and the importance of this eclipse really is based on two things. I like this eclipse. It's kind of an interesting eclipse because it has good news and bad news. The good news is that the eclipse is harmonized or trine to Jupiter. So there's going to be an uplifting energy. First of all, an eclipse, whether solar or lunar, is often a slicing and a letting go. Lunar eclipses often tie us more to the past, and solar eclipses are more abrupt. There's an ancient concept that at a solar eclipse, the king must die. We'll come back to that in a minute when we talk about the upcoming solar eclipse, without any imperative stated in my words very carefully. The fact is that there certainly is that energy of a change of power at the top. I'm not going there. The lunar eclipse, though, often brings back old memories that we process, deal with, and go away from. The lunar eclipse is a full moon eclipse, and so we have the full moon in Aquarius. Aquarius and Leo is an interesting combination because Aquarius is the only sign of the 12 signs of the zodiac that has a human form. You know, the word zodiac comes from the Greek zoidion, which means the zoo. And in the zoo, there are rams and lions and crabs and scorpions and all kinds of things, and a human. And the human is the Aquarius. It's the universal principle for humankind, if you will. Aquarius is an air sign. Air is intellect. There's not a lot of feeling, which is water, in the sign of Aquarius. It's conceptual. It's intellectual. It's the nervous system. And so the moon, which is always emotional and feeling, in Aquarius often feels like the proverbial fish out of water, or in this case, human out of water. Interestingly enough, though, it's the water bearer, and that waterless human is actually pouring water as the symbol. Then there's a whole story there. We'll save that for winter when the sun moves into Aquarius. Let it suffice to say for now, though, that Leo is fiery and heart-centered. Leo is the sun. Every planet relates to a sign. Every sign relates to a planet. In traditional astrology, the sun relates to Leo. This is the full moon of the sun in Leo, and so we have that sense of love and of heart-centered and of the feeling of the nobility of bringing love and appreciation and warmth, summer warmth, into the world. The Aquarius moon, though, Aquarius traditionally is related to the planet Saturn, limits and boundaries. In modern astrology, we add Uranus breaking through those boundaries. The erratic, the uncontrollable, that which doesn't follow rules, the rebel, the unconventional. And we have this full moon being eclipsed by the shadow of the earth of this erratic craziness that in some ways is reflecting the center of our heart. However, there's two important things. One of them is, as I said, this trine to Jupiter, which adds this whole philosophical, positive, beneficent, expansive, optimistic lean on what it is we're trying to leave in the past and move on into the future, with or without, that is. The other piece is that this full moon eclipse is also tied up with Mars. Good news, bad news. Well, who's to know which is which? Theoretically, Jupiter here is the good news. It says anything is possible. We can do this. Mars says, I'm going to kick the shit out of you before you get positive on me. Mars is the angry red planet. And so Mars is still close enough to the sun, even though this aspect perfected back on July 26th, doing a little bit of time traveling, because that's today for us here. But for you watching the video on YouTube, July 26th was a week ago, or 2 or 3. Anyhow, so it's still a conjunction. It's within 4 degrees. And so this full moon eclipse has that in it. This full moon eclipse also has another piece in it, and that is Mercury, which is strong now. I say now, the beginning of August and through the full moon, because Mercury is moving through, if we even go back to the beginning of the month. Oh, let's do this by day. Okay, come on. If we go back to the beginning of the month, we have Mercury at 6 degrees of Virgo. In fact, Mercury moved into Virgo about a week ago. So Mercury is in Virgo. Why is this important? Every planet relates to a sign. Every sign relates to a planet. The planet that relates to Virgo is Mercury. Mercury in Virgo is loud. It's her own sign. And Mercury is hermaphroditic. Is that a right word? Hermaphrodite, but is the adjective hermaphroditic? Or if you're in denial, it's hermaphroditic. All right. Mercury in Virgo is strong, but Mercury is connected with 2 different signs. The other sign being Gemini. Gemini wants to connect any information it can. Gemini is the switchboard operator. It's the word processor. It's the information noisy AM radio tuning the dial. Gemini is, I call it the information slut. So I don't care whether it's true, fake news, who gives a shit? It's information. You know, just give me more information. I can't get enough of that information. That's Gemini. Curiosity. Virgo, on the other hand, is above that noisy Gemini. Looks at that and goes, get it together, boy. Because Virgo, Mercury in Virgo, is not about a lot of information. It's about precisely the most useful information. Virgo's an earth sign. It's practical. It's analytical. It's the mental function that's not chitter-chatter at a cocktail party. It's the actual analysis, the engineering analysis of whether this bridge will hold the weight of that car or not. You understand the difference? They're still both an intellectual, mental Mercury. So we have Mercury strong now in its own sign, Virgo. And we want to come back up to come on, we can do this. Back up to the eclipse day. There we go. And we have Mercury in Gemini coming into, over the next couple of days.
Mercury in Virgo.
Thank you. Who said that? Gold star. Thank you. Mercury in Virgo coming into an opposition with Neptune in Pisces. Now, Neptune in Pisces is kind of like Mercury in Virgo's nemesis. Why? Because Mercury in Virgo is precise. It's critical. And when I say critical, I don't mean that's okay, that's not okay, but that too. I mean critical in like a laser beam. It's so exacting that if it's not exactly right, you won't even know it's there. So Mercury in Virgo is precise. Meanwhile, Neptune in Pisces is... Huh? Give me another hit off that bomb. Mercury in Pisces is no boundaries. Neptune in Pisces is no boundaries. Mercury in Virgo is like the engineering analysis. It's like the user's manual to whatever the new piece of technology you got. Neptune in Pisces, however, is a poem. It's a Jackson Pollock painting. Maybe that has a tinge of Uranus in it also. Neptune in Pisces is dreamy. It's a song. It's dance. There's nothing precise about it. So Mercury is exactly opposite. Well, let's look at this because Mercury is coming into the opposition with Uranus. Can you see that at the full moon eclipse? And I'm going to move this a day at a time. And now Mercury is at 10 degrees. It's at 11 degrees. It's moving really, really slowly. Why? Because on August 12th, it turns direct. And watch what happens here. 11 degrees, 28 minutes. I'm sorry, it turns retrograde. I'm having a Neptune and Pisces moment, apparently. On the 11th, it's at 11 degrees, 36 minutes. It's within 2 degrees of being exact to Neptune. Then on the 12th, it's at 11 degrees, 38 minutes. And then on the 13th, it's at 11 degrees, 35 minutes. It's turned retrograde and backing off. This Mercury opposition Neptune does not perfect. You got it? Because perfection is when it becomes exact. And this doesn't become exact. It goes retrograde, and it doesn't become exact until the following month, which I think it's the first week. No, it's actually the second week in September before that becomes exact. So this is very important because it's almost like the dream is being denied. There's that sense of that imagination, but we can't quite get there. This is an important piece of the eclipse. All right, so now Mercury turns direct on the 12th. And in fact, it's in its own sign of Virgo. And I just want to run this fast forward ahead because Mercury turns retrograde in Virgo. And although we're going to bump over to September, on September, it's actually in August 31st, Mercury retrograde backs into Leo. Let's just look at here. Watch this Mercury here. We're going to do this at a day at a time. Forget about all the other noise, but watch that Mercury. There it's 10 degrees, 9 degrees. It's now moving into the fray. It's 4 degrees, 3 degrees. See that Mercury now at 2 degrees? At 1 degree of Virgo, and boom, there it is back in Leo on August 31st. Almost like a remedial, let's talk about it, about what's obvious rather than that Mercury in Virgo being precise.
Is that where it goes direct to?
It'll turn direct on the 2nd. It's at 28 degrees. It backs up to 28. It turns direct, and then it goes back into Virgo. It turns direct on September 5th, and it goes back into Virgo on September 9th. But in there, and this becomes an important piece, as this Mercury backs up, that 28, 29 degree point of Leo is the point that we're watching all month. Why? That's the eclipse point. It's rare, it happens once a year, that there'll be a new moon and that there'll be 2 new moons in the same sign. Because, there's almost 13 new moons per year, not quite. And so what that means is that not every year, but most every year, we'll have a new moon at the 0 or 1st or 2nd degree of a sign, which means that we'll have another new moon at the 29th degree of that same sign. And we've just had a new moon in Leo, and let's bump back to the eclipse now. I know we're going back and forth, but I'm trying to tie this Mercury and Mercury retrograde and how important it is in this picture, and Mars also, because they're tied into the eclipse point, which has its own level of importance that I'll get to in just a moment. So let's back this up. Let's see if there's anything else I want to talk about. Oh, yeah. Let's go back to the 13th. We're working our way quickly to the eclipse. On the 13th, we have the Sun forming a trine with Saturn. The Sun at 21 degrees of Leo. In fact, Mars will hit that same point later in the month as Jupiter hits the sextile. But we're getting this strength now of the Sun trining Saturn on the 13th. Even though Mercury's turned retrograde, Saturn trining the Sun is giving us some stability. That's on the 13th. On the 15th, we have Venus moving through Cancer, forming an opposition to Pluto. And this is intense. This is the underworld stuff. This is feelings coming up. This is power and control, possibly about money. August 15th may be a day when all of a sudden money stuff, maybe personally, but here I'm talking Washington, D.C. I'm talking about whatever may happen in the new the new Attorney General and the disassembling of Mueller's investigation that apparently may all be real and may happen. But it may be that around August 15th, when Venus, the planet of money and wealth, and is squaring Jupiter and opposing Pluto, we may see another level of stuff come up. Got it? But in personal relationships, this is about intense feelings, because Pluto is intensity, and that energy is coming up from deep. Passion. So that's on the 15th. By the time we get to the 16th, that Venus squares Jupiter. And so, again, there's almost a sense of too much here. Too much. By the 20th, on the 20th, we have two things happening. We have Mars sextiling Jupiter and the Sun trining Uranus on the 20th. Let's get there. So this is the day before the eclipse. We're already in eclipse land here. Now, I know a lot's been said about this. You can go online, Google. I hate these kind of sensational media words that are wrapped around astrological events, like the Grand Square, the Great American Eclipse. This is being called the Great American Eclipse. Yeah. Why? It's an interesting title, but it's a rare eclipse that begins and ends within the continental United States. And unlike lunar eclipses that are visible all over the planet where it's nighttime, a total eclipse is only visible along a narrow path that's about 40 to 100 miles wide, depending upon the eclipse. Let's say 50 miles wide or so. And that path can last several hundred miles to a few thousand miles, depending upon the eclipse. This particular total eclipse of the Sun begins in coastal Oregon and ends in coastal North Carolina. And you can draw a 50-mile wide path from Salem, Oregon to I don't know what point in North Carolina, but pick a point. And that'll be where this eclipse is total.
Are you sure Carolina, not California?
North Carolina, huh?
Carolina, not California? South Carolina.
South Carolina. No, I'm talking. No, the eclipse goes. The eclipses go from. This eclipse goes from northwest to southeast, the entire length of the country. Now, it is astrological assumption, jargon, lore. There's another word I'm looking for. That the main action of the fallout of an eclipse occurs in the shadow areas, which means that this eclipse has the United States written all over it. And eclipses are often about abrupt changes, sometimes changes of power. You with me here? All right. Now, we're going to come back to that in just a moment, but I also want to say that that if you're considering going to observe the eclipse, I've been in one other total eclipse of the sun, and it actually was on the same Saros cycles are the historical eclipses come in cycles. I don't want to get into it, but the last eclipse on this same cycle was I think it was August 15th, 1999. And it hit the very southern tip of England, and I was at an astrology conference that was scheduled to be during that total eclipse of the sun. And it was cloudy. It was England. But it was still amazing because it was 4 minutes of the middle of night in the middle of day, and then it was day again. Now, what I want to say from having experienced a number of partial eclipses and one total eclipse is this. The difference between a partial eclipse, which we will get here on August 21st, we will get the partial eclipse that will be visible. But the difference between the visual of a partial eclipse, even at 99%, and a total eclipse at 100, the difference between a partial eclipse and a total eclipse is the difference between night and day. And I mean that exactly. So, if possible, figure out a way to go see this eclipse. It's a rare one. Now, the eclipse itself occurs on August 21st. Oh, there were two things that feed into the eclipse, though, that I wanted to talk about. One of them was that Mars is moving into the trine with Saturn, and it's already exactly sextile Jupiter. So we got this whole stability factor cooking that is pulling in the energy of Uranus, even though Uranus is wide from this 20 degrees of fire, Leo, Mars, 20 degrees of Jupiter in Libra, 21 degrees fire, and 28 degrees at 7 degrees off. The fact is that the sun on the 20th forms an exact trine with that Uranus. And this makes it electric. They say that, Uranus is the planet of sudden change. When a trine is involved with Uranus, they say the change that you've been trying to make happen forever happens so easily you don't even know it happened. It's like the change of getting wet when you're standing on a rolling log. It's easy to get wet because you can't not fall off the log. So we have the sun trining Uranus setting this eclipse up. And then on the day of the eclipse, the actual eclipse itself occurs at Yep. We'll get there. That's close enough. All right, 11:30. So the actual eclipse itself occurs at 28 degrees and 53 minutes of Leo. We can call this 29 degrees of Leo. For any of us who don't have a lot of Virgo in our chart. I mean, it's just about 29 degrees of Leo. Remember, the previous new moon was at 1 degree of Leo, and this at 29 degrees of Leo, just 2 hours later, the moon will move into Virgo. So this eclipse is a very delicate moment. But in Leo, it's still important for a couple of reasons. Number one, it's still harmonizing or trining with Uranus. Number two, over the following weeks, Mars will come through that eclipse point. And also, Mercury will back up over it. Remember I said I would tie this in later? Mercury, at the end of the month, backs into Leo, and from the end of August through the first week of September, Mercury is lined up with that eclipse point, so it's extending that energy. Now there's two other incredibly important things about this eclipse point. One of them is this. The Mesopotamians, the Chaldeans had the Arabs had what they called 4 stars that were considered to be the watchers. Watchers meaning the stars that watched what was going on. You know, there's a whole branch of astrology that I don't spend a lot of time with. I'm aware of, but I don't delve into this real deeply. But it's the astrology of the fixed stars. When a planet lines up with a star, all the different stars have their own mythology. And this is a very rich area of astrology. There are 4 fixed stars that are considered to be the Persian watchers. To the Persians, they were the most important 4 stars. And these 4 stars are Fomalhaut, Antares, Aldebaran, and Regulus. Each of the 4 watchers offered success with a condition. And if you didn't meet that condition, it always brought success to an end. So we have Fomalhaut, which was success through noble ideas. This is at 4 degrees of Pisces. If anyone has a planet in their chart at 4 degrees of Pisces, then then you may understand this mythology, because Fomalhaut says that as long as you have noble ideas, success is yours. But as soon as you become corrupt in your ideas, you fall from grace. That's Fomalhaut's deal. Antares, which is sometimes considered anti-Aries, it's in tropically in our astrology, it's at 10 degrees of Sagittarius, but it's actually it's the tail of the scorpion. So it's anti-Aries. It's a red star. It's angry. It's Martian, and it's basically success through balance. But if you become obsessed, think Scorpio, even though it's at 10 degrees of Sagittarius, if you become obsessed, it's the end. So Fomalhaut is the watcher of the south, and that says loss if you become corrupt. Antares is the watcher of the west, and that says success through balance, downfall if you become obsessed. Aldebaran, which is the watcher of the east, is at 10 degrees of Gemini, and this is basically success through integrity. If you lose your integrity, Aldebaran says you're screwed, you're done. And then the fourth and most important one for our purpose is Regulus, which is at 29 degrees of Leo. It's actually, because of precession, it's just from Earth's point of view, it's now technically at 0 degrees of Virgo, but it's within 1.25 degrees of this eclipse. Are you with me? So what's Regulus's deal? Regulus is the watcher of the north, and Regulus is basically success if revenge is avoided. Regulus says honor. It's a king star. These are all considered to be king stars. Regulus basically says that if you seek revenge, Regulus makes sure that you fall from power. All right, so this eclipse at 29 degrees of Leo is conjunct Regulus. It's tied up to a trine with Uranus that says change is easier than it ever should be. And on top of that, we also have Mars forming a trine with Saturn, which is about organization, discipline, control. Yes, please.
And Saturn's been stationary, right? It's stationary.
Saturn's ready to turn to, Saturn's not been moving much. And so we have this eclipse that is ready to change things. Now, everyone experiences these eclipses, but if you have a planet or a point in your chart that is at the eclipse degree, within a degree or two, you can see where in your chart that falls and what that might mean. Got it? All right, so let's take a real quick look at Donald Trump's chart. This is an accurate time of birth. He has Mars, the god of war, rising in Leo, and 29 degrees 56 minutes of Leo is rising in his chart. This eclipse falls on his ascendant. On top of that, as I've said here before, Trump was born during a full moon eclipse. He was born during a full moon eclipse. The north node of the moon lined up with, or the south node of the moon lined up with the moon at a full moon. Technically, it was actually an hour and a half after, but a full moon eclipse lasts a couple of hours. And he was born during a full moon eclipse with his sun conjunct Uranus, which is for better and or for worse, depending upon where you fall on the political spectrum. The sun conjunct Uranus is either genius, mad genius, or innovator, or crazy person. And again, I'm not looking to label him as any of those. I'm just labeling him as a Sun-Uranus person who was born during the instability of a full moon eclipse with Regulus, the star that says, if you screw with revenge, the cosmos will screw you. And there's an eclipse at that point. See you in September. It's not funny. I mean, it's quite a scenario. And it's this whole thing is very important. You know, I mean, also the fact that Saturn is stationed, as you said, it turns direct on the 25th, which means that it may take a little bit of time. See, eclipses are funny time-wise. Other astrological events, if you can time them to the event. Eclipses seem to operate both backwards and forwards in time for sometimes months before and after the eclipse, especially when another planet hits the eclipse point. All right, so what we have during this eclipse is that 29-degree point being set up. And then in weeks after the eclipse, we have Mars moving up to that eclipse point. Can you see? As Mercury is retrograding back into it. And there, on September 2nd, we have Mercury conjunct Mars. Mercury, the planet of communication, retrograde, revisiting old material, in Leo, lined up with Trump's ascendant, lined up with Mars, the god of war. Will there be a distractionary war between now and then? I don't know. I mean, I'm not him. Thank God. I'm not him. But we don't know what that Mars on his ascendant, he's experiencing this Mars return. Mars is coming in the sky around to where it was when he was born. And Mercury retrograde is lining up with that Mars the end of August, first week of September, on the point that has been energized by the eclipse. That's my story for the month of August. I don't even know how to draw this to a real conclusion, except I do. And I'm going to share with you something that I was going to share at the opening, and I said that I would save it. And some of you may know this. This piece You may know that the Hopis of all the Native American tribes have been particularly interested in prophecy, in future. This is not a new thing for them. They have a council of elders who have been, for years, maybe even decades, issuing these prophecies. And one of these prophecies actually came around last summer, and it goes something like this. And this piece is attributed to an unnamed Hopi elder. For all I know, it could have been written by John McCain's speechwriter. I have no idea. I think the Hopis are in that area of the Southwest. Anyhow, this is a Hopi elder speaks, and this will be our end point for this evening. You have been telling the people that this is the 11th hour. Now you must go back and tell the people this is the hour. And there are things to be considered. Where are you living? What are you doing? What are your relationships? Are you in right relation? Where is your water? Where is your garden? Know your garden. It is time to speak your truth. Create your community. Be good to each other. And do not look outside yourself for the leader. Then he clasped his hands together, smiled, and said, "This could be a good time. There is a river flowing now very fast. It is so great and swift that there are those who will be afraid. They will try to hold on to the shore. They will feel they are torn apart, and they will suffer greatly. No, the river has its destination. The elders say we must let go of the shore, push off into the middle of the river, keep our eyes open and our heads above water. And I say, see who is there with you and celebrate. At this time in history, we are to take nothing personally, least of all ourselves. For the moment that we do, our spiritual growth and journey comes to a halt. The time for the lone wolf is over. Gather yourselves. Banish the word struggle from your attitude and from your vocabulary. All that we do now must be done in a sacred manner and in celebration. We are the ones we've been waiting for.